truth court trial on one of the papers that I've written about what I actually do, which is I'm a computational cognitive neuroscientist, and I've been studying how the human brain computes for about 50 years. And one of the things that's come out of that study is this very curious property of how our brains compute, which is we don't compute the way we thought 50 years ago our brains computed, which is logically. And it's been said that we compute by intuition, which is more correct. But as a result of that, we can lie as readily as we can tell the truth. But our brains are set up, and they are constantly doing this, trying to figure out what the truth is. That's what our brains do, because what we compute is constantly computing are all these other realities that could be true. And one of the reasons that we're very good at surviving is we figure out which of these realities that we're computing is in fact true, and then we remember that. We tend to remember the things that we've decided are true. And we can also, as a survival thing, deceive other animals. One of the things that's come out of the study is that what we're seeing in ourselves is true of any neural system. So any animal actually thinks like we do, oddly, and they have the same problem. They can get fooled. They can also lie in order to survive, and it's all out of the same computational base. It turns out that there's a kind of a flaw in this in terms of what happens when things like the printing press happened and now mass media happens, which is one person can do enormous damage by lying. It can be damage on a global basis. It's not just in your little community. It used to be that when we lived in villages, people dared not lie because there were only a certain small number of people in the village, and once they caught that person lying and just successfully deceiving people, that person will be dealt with. But now you can't deal with those people because they're out on the internet somewhere. George Washington, 200 and something years ago, knew this is the reason that they formed the United States Constitution, the constitutional government that had this separation of powers. And Washington very explicitly stated, and it's in this paper, that to have a successful democracy, you must never vote for a divisive liar. If you want to preserve the liberty of the people, don't vote for the divisive liar. Of course, George Washington said it using English over 200 years old. So in this paper, I say that this is the most, what George Washington was essentially saying, and this is the very beginning of his farewell address, where he spent 2 years writing this farewell address that he gave to the American people on his retirement from government. He said, this is my summary of it, of this first couple of 3 sentences in his farewell address is, this is the most important message I have for you. It's about those who lie divisively. You should not vote for them. Never vote for a divisive liar. And this was the most important thing he had to say. So it turned out that the first real damage that's done with divisive lying happened as the societies got larger and kings formed, and people were told what the truth was, which was not the truth. And they did it with posters and stuff like that. And the printing press happened. And there was an upsurge in the evil that comes from divisive lying, the dictators on a massive scale. And people who were studying this kind of stuff realized that they had to do this with the way the Constitution was in order to separate the powers and to prevent one person from controlling the truth. So the way George Washington actually phrased it, and this is literally his words. This is the beginning of his farewell address. This is the main theme of the farewell address. Your welfare urges me to offer the result of much reflection, which appear to me all important. In other words, he's saying this is the most important thing. From different quarters, many artifices will be employed to weaken your minds. Lies will be employed to weaken your mind, covertly and insidiously directed. In other words, with lies. Insidious basically means lying. You should watch for your preservation with jealous anxiety, indignantly frowning upon the first dawning of every attempt to alienate any portion of our country from the wet rest. That's the definition of a divisive lie. It's a lie that divides people. And he says, that's the one advice I give you. Don't do this. Watch out for this. If somebody starts lying divisively, don't give him any power. We can lose our Constitution this way. He continues, so the domination of one faction over another, one party over another, sharpened by the spirit of revenge, natural to party dissension, which creates parties, which in different ages and countries has perpetuated the most horrid enormities, is itself a frightful despotism. In other words, once the divisive lying starts, parties form, and that formation of parties actually can become a frightful despotism. And he goes on a little bit further, and it's not in this article. And he says, eventually, one person more fortunate than others will take over, and at the expense of everyone's liberty, which is what we see with Trump today. This was also predicted by Plato over 2,000 years ago, who had noticed that the democracies had been experimented with, and they noticed that democracies always failed into oligarchies where divisive lying created the oligarchs. They would lie about regular people and divide them. They would divide the people up, and the oligarchs would take over. And then once the oligarchs took over, one oligarch who was more fortunate would become a despot and would take over the country. This was noticed, and actually you can read Plato's words in the book that's titled The Republic. You can go back that far in time and see that this was recognized. So the key is never vote for or give power to anybody who is a divisive liar. One of the other pieces that I have here is that something called the movie The Great Dictator, which was by Charlie Chaplin. And in that movie, he gives a speech warning people of the same thing. Never listen to a divisive liar. Charlie Chaplin says, essentially, dictators lie to give all liberty to themselves at the expense of you. And we now know why that's so easy to do, why brains do that just naturally. And we know that when we didn't have very large numbers of people and communication was not so easy, this happened in small communities, small villages. People would lie, but they would be taken care of. They, in other words, they could not get away with it. But as the communities grew larger and larger, this became a problem. This advantage that we had, that we could deceive other animals very readily, we could deceive each other very readily. And it was natural to the way that our brains compute. And it's inescapable in terms of how our brains compute. So if people ask questions like, how can Trump lie so well? In a paragraph, he can lie 50 times. How can he just do this? Okay. And the answer is that anybody can just do this. But if you're raised properly, you essentially won't, because you're not raised in an environment where divisive lying is permitted, and you're taught very young, don't do that. Okay, that's bad. So that's what this article is all about. And it turns out that the Economist had recognized this, and they pointed out that divisive lying works. It works beautifully if you're allowed to get away with it. They gave this article 3 titles: The Politics of Paranoia, which is politics of convincing you that somebody else is a bad guy; Imaginary Hobgoblins are these weird goblins that destroy everything in people's heads, and that's divisive lying. Scaremongering works, scaring you, scaring people about other people works. Fans of truth should fear it. So we know all this works, and the only defense against it is everybody knows exactly what George Washington warned you don't do, is if you encounter a divisive liar, give him or her no power. The second you give them power is the second the system starts breaking. And if you continue it long enough, you will get oligarchies, and you will get dictatorships, which historically has been correct. So this case that I've done basically says that it is true, never vote for a divisive liar. And the case I just made is exactly the basis for that case. And I completely believe that this is true. The history here and the science just converged on exactly the same conclusion. So I said my verdicts are yes. Is it the whole truth? I said no, and part of this, there are other forms, many other forms of divisive lying that signal a sociopath or psychopath that should never be given a position of power over other people. What I was really trying to say is that there's divisive lying that, if it's telling the truth, is not bad. But there is developed divisive lying that, if it's lying, if it actually is lying, then it's damaging. So if I say things divisively about somebody, if I say that this person is a crook, that's okay. That's telling people the truth. So it's not that you can't say divisive things about other people. It's when you say divisive things that are in fact not true, that you have these incredibly negative effects. Is it nothing but the truth? I said, yes, everything I'm saying is nothing but the truth. What's the deceit? I say there is no deceit. What I'm saying here is incredibly valid. What I'm saying is what's been said, we know since Plato, and certainly probably before Plato. I think that's 2,500 years ago. And we know that this from Chinese culture as well, which goes back another few thousand years. In the art of war, this stuff is discussed. The art of war, it's actually discussed as a technique to beat your enemy without having to risk your life. Is the deceit or truth intended? The truth here is fully intended. I meant this to be the truth. I believe it to be the truth. I meant it that way. What's the motivation? My motivation is solely to be informative and to try to get people to understand in simple terms. Never vote for a divisive liar. Never give power to a divisive liar. If you encounter one, and you will encounter them, just don't give them power over you. Just don't. You give them a little bit of power, they'll take more. The more that they take, the more that they can get, just continuing to be divisive liars. And you see this time and time again in history. What's the social acceptability of the truth or lie? My view is that this is more than socially acceptable. This is mandatory that we teach kids as they're growing up that divisive lying is not tolerated. But you will still have some. So we know that about 10 to 20% of humankind are sociopaths, which is a divisive liars, and some smaller percentage, pick a number, 1 or 2%, go to the point of becoming psychopaths, which are murderous. They will kill people as they climb the power ladder with their divisive lie.
Yeah, they'll take them and injure them and not think twice about hurting them or anyone else.
They have no empathy whatsoever. So sociopaths lack empathy, but they struggle with themselves.
Yeah.
Once you become a psychopath, you can see the people who stop struggling with themselves. They start enjoying the damage they can do, which is what you see.
Sad, very sad.
Yeah, and it's just as clear as day in how people, the educational system, not to have everybody understand this, because it's so clear. The evidence for it is so clear historically and so forth. And it turns out that cognitive science explains why it's inescapable that anybody has the opportunity to become a divisive liar and to get power over other people that way, as long as the other people allow it and don't stop it. So what label would improve the social acceptability? I think I said, this is true. Never vote for a divisive liar. So what I'd like to do for the jurors is basically we'll call out the jurors, and each juror gives a 20 to 30-second summary of their verdict. So pick off something that you want to say. If you've got something where you disagree with me, please tell us, okay? Because that's what makes this stuff really valuable to everybody, is if somebody sees something where they think that this is wrong. This claim is a very strong claim that I'm making. And whether I'm right or not is, who knows? I'm a scientist, so I don't have I'm constantly looking for truth, but I don't necessarily believe that I know the truth, and I believe that I can be wrong. Juror 1. Juror 1 here.
I'm not seeing one yet.
Juror 2.
Evening, Maud. Evening, everyone. give a summary or to give my opinion,
Yeah.
I believe that while scaremongering and manipulation by political figures is generally seen as a negative, I can see it being understandable and necessary in certain situations. Because I feel that as if the truth isn't always as simple or safe to share, and sometimes using fear or strategic deception can serve a greater purpose as long as it's done within a justifiable intent. So I would say that while voting for a divisive liar isn't ideal, I think it can be acceptable or forgivable depending on the context and the outcome of their decision.
So this has to do with the thing that I mentioned before, which is sometimes divisive truth is okay. There's no problem with that. But divisive lying can't. So my view is a little bit different than yours. Divisive lying is never okay. And particularly giving power to anybody, because what you just was an excuse, that's okay. And what you don't really realize is you give another way to put this, which is really interesting. So my PhD is in psychology. And we know that sociopaths and psychopaths, that's not in your DNA. It's learned. In other words, if you're raised wrong, okay, you learn that divisive lying gets you power. And it works. When you're very young, you're allowed to get away with divisive lying and you learn it. And then as you get better and better at it, you learn how to really use it to your advantage. And so by the time you're an adult, you're permanently a sociopath or a psychopath. Sociopathy and psychopathy, which is sociopath is just a non-murderous version, cannot be cured. If you read the literature on all this, you'll find out that sociopaths cannot be cured. Psychopaths cannot be cured. There's no known cure. They learned it works. You can't talk them out of it because they lie. They'll say, yeah, I'm talked out of it. But they're not. It turns out that the best that can be done, and this is exactly what George Washington was saying, since we can't cure these people, it's up to the people that they're trying to get power over to recognize what's happening and not to listen to them, realizing that there's a deceit going on. So that's the odd principle. The reason for the truth court is really, we know the only way to mitigate this is if people think that something is the truth or something is a lie, they take it to other people and see what they think. That's the best that can be done, because if something is a divisive lie and you take it to other people and see, and they all say, yeah, that's a divisive lie, then everybody that's in that conversation has now been immunized against that lie. And it doesn't have an effect because their brains sit there and go, the truth is that's a divisive lie. If not given the opportunity for dialogue, then the deceit can be successful, which is what the divisive liar is doing, is the deceit. And the guy can get more power. So the best you can do is have dialogue among people. And it turns out you learn to lie basically shortly after you're born. It's just built into how all neural systems compute. And you're taught not to, initially a little tiny kid giggles, but over time, if you're not told this is unacceptable in a way that really do obey, If you're permitted to get away with it, then it only gets worse. And we saw that with Trump as well, which is what he was 4 years ago was far less dangerous than what he is today. He just gets worse. It doesn't ever get better. This has happened through these demagogues and kings and so forth throughout all of history. You know, once they're that kind of person, it's not that we don't live with the people. It's that these people just can't be given positions of power. They can certainly be your friend. That's not a problem, as long as you don't have power over other people. So, juror 3.
Greetings all. I am in agreement with the plaintiff on the case. I would just like to add that the statement, "Never vote for a divisive liar," is fundamentally true. Lying, especially with the intent to divide society, undermines trust in leadership, destabilizes democratic institutions, and polarizes communities. Leaders should strive to unite, not fracture those they serve. Voting for someone known to deceive and divide is a betrayal of democratic responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you. So you and I are in agreement.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Juror 4. Juror 4 here.
Yeah. I don't guess so.
Juror 5. Or juror 6 is. Oh, no, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm actually inclined to believe or agree with the plaintiff on this.
So you're juror 4.
Yes.
Yeah.
I would agree. I don't think having a liar in power can be any good for anyone really. You can't do any good if you can't trust the person you're supposed to be following. How do you take a divisive liar's word? No, how do you agree with them? So I would agree with the plaintiff here.
Cool. So there's no juror 5. There's how's juror 6?
I don't see one yet, but we have a few in the chat that haven't spoken. So you said we don't have a juror 5?
Yeah, there's no juror 5 in my list. So juror 7.
See anything?
Is juror 8 here?
We have someone with juror 8 by their name, so.
Yeah, I'm here. My stance on this is having for a person in a position of power being a divisive liar could be beneficial to a certain extent. Because, like, for example, I use Trump as an example. I'll use the same example. There's certain things that, like, I don't think the public should be aware of or should know, because then they will change their stance on a certain topic based off of what the person in power says. So, like, I don't want to use any specific examples because I can think of one, like about the Mexicans and the border thing that changed people's perspectives on certain things. So certain things typically are better left unsaid, or like maybe just a white lie to, I would say, not save, but like to like just, I can't put it into words now, but I don't know if you see what I'm saying. But this is my personal stance with, if it's to divide people, as you said, a divisive liar could be a bad thing.
What Washington warns against are the people who say things.
Yeah.
Okay, so I know some really good politicians, people who can really be trusted and so forth and so on. We will never hear them divisively lie, but you will hear them go silent.
Yeah, exactly.
They don't want to say something. And my mother taught me this. She beat it into her 4 sons. Okay. If you don't have something good to say,
don't say nothing at all.
Say it. Okay.
Yep.
And that's a safe way to grow up, which is you'll never get caught in a divisive lie because you will just simply never say anything bad about somebody unless you're really sure that what you said is true about them. Okay. And if you're really sure, that's not a divisive lie. So what she meant was if you don't have something good to say, don't say it. You may have something that's not good to say, but you have to say because it's really true. And it's really scary true, which is in some sense what I'm doing here, which is I think my mother would not object to what I'm saying. Yeah.
Also, you stand the chance of getting sued for libel or slander.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. There are laws that are out there that try to constrain this stuff. But the fact is that what George Washington said is you have to constrain it yourself.
Yeah.
In his farewell address, he actually says this. He says habits are as important as law. What you'll just naturally do is just as important as the laws. There'll be laws, but the laws will never be perfect.
Right.
They will never stop this. You just can't make the laws that will stop this. It's an interesting thing. And because it's so easy and for you to think about these things and to see the opportunities, for example, it's so easy to see an opportunity to lie and get yourself into a position of power. You and divisively lie and get yourself into a position of power that you're confronted with the opportunity all the time. And the way your brain works is it knows that it's got the opportunity, but it decides because of your experiences and so forth and so on. Your brain very unconsciously decides not to take the opportunities, or your brain very unconsciously, if you learn that it's really good and it's great for surviving and making a lot of money and getting power over people, your brain learns and unconsciously it can outthink anybody, and it's very quick. And I can go on for much too long about why this actually works this way. And so you're always confronted with this. It really does depend upon your upbringing to not have it as part of your skills that you routinely use. And then we know that. It's crazy, we know that. We do know there's probably also some DNA components to this, predispositions in some people to just fall into divisively lying. But we also know that if the kid who falls into that is properly raised, the kid will never become very bad at that. He will never become very evil doing that. A perfectly good and wonderful person. So even kids with a predisposition to try this stuff out will, if raised properly, will never become a problem for society. And so it's this weird thing, and it's an inescapable problem. This sounds really good. I appreciate the input, and this all has to be individual struggles for all of us. We don't, this is not something that, the laws can stop. It's individual. And one of the other things is that on the positive side is what all this says is that our brains are truth engines. What our brains are computing on is trying to figure out what the truth is all the time. That's what neural systems evolved for, was giving an animal the ability to figure out what the truth is all the time, despite the fact that things may be deceiving him. So the environment around you is highly deceptive all the time. It may be other people that are being deceptive, but your brain is constantly figuring out whether it's being deceived. And if it figures out that it's being deceived, and that may be the truth, that he's being deceived, and your brain's figured that out. And that's the reason that we know that recognizing the deceit is about the only cure there is. And it's the receiver of the lie that can be cured or inoculated against the lies, but not the liar. The liar will just get worse if they're successful, if they're allowed to be successful. In other words, if people let them get away with it. And it happens early. It's not something that you have to be over 30 years old to start doing. No, you've been doing it since you were 3, and you were allowed to get away with it for years and years. And it was promoted, and you learned that it got you a lot of power, and you just continue it. But you can get power without lying, by the way, as long as it's true. And so you can divisively say things as long as it's really true. And in some sense, that's where laws really come from. So I appreciate this. So are there any other questions, so forth?
I don't have any. I think we're pretty good now.
We'll continue to improve the
Okay.
product, the Truth Court, and it's just like any other.
It's going to take off here before long. It's going to, and it's going to be big when it does.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it will. Okay, so y'all. Okay.
Okay. Bye, y'all.